Sometimes the heart doesn't break because someone leaves. Sometimes it breaks because someone else finally arrives. The little cafe on Maple Street wasn't fancy. It had squeaky wooden floors, mismatched coffee mugs, and the kind of homemade apple pie that locals swore tasted better every fall. On most Friday evenings, every table by the front windows filled before 6, while the soft glow from hanging lights spilled onto the sidewalk like an invitation to slow down. Ethan Walker stood just outside the entrance, adjusting the collar of the only navy button-down shirt he owned that didn't have sawdust hidden somewhere in the seams. At 38, he had forgotten what it felt like to wait for someone because they might become part of his future instead of because they already were. His palms felt strangely warm despite the cool October breeze drifting through the quiet neighborhood. He checked his watch, then slipped it back into his pocket. This wasn't really his idea. His 8-year-old daughter, Lily, had insisted for weeks that every hero deserved another chance to smile. She had even enlisted Mrs. Harper from church to introduce him to a kind elementary school librarian who, according to everyone involved except Ethan, was absolutely perfect. He wasn't sure anyone could be perfect anymore. Not after the silence that had settled inside his home 3 years earlier. Still, he had promised Lily he would try. Across the street, hidden behind the lace curtains of a white 2-story house, Claire Bennett watched him without meaning to. She had only stepped toward the front window to water the ferns sitting beside it when she noticed Ethan smoothing his shirt with the same nervous gesture he always made before school concerts or parent meetings. Then she saw the woman walking toward him. The stranger smiled warmly. Ethan smiled back, polite but uncertain. They shook hands. Claire felt something inside her chest tighten before she could stop it. She told herself it was nothing. Just surprise. Just curiosity. Just the harmless interest neighbors naturally had in one another after living across the street for nearly 6 years. Yet her watering can remain suspended in midair as she watched Ethan hold the cafe door open for someone who wasn't her. She laughed once under her breath, though it carried no joy. "Good for you," she whispered to the empty room. "Really, good for you." The words sounded convincing until they echoed back at her. Down below, a cool gust lifted orange leaves across the sidewalk. Ethan glanced instinctively toward the neighborhood before stepping inside. For the briefest second, his eyes wandered toward Claire's house, toward the familiar porch swing where she often read on autumn evenings, toward the flower boxes she somehow kept blooming long after everyone else's had faded. The curtains moved slightly. He couldn't tell if anyone was there. Then the moment passed. Inside the cafe, conversations blended into the comforting rhythm of clinking silverware and quiet laughter. The hostess guided Ethan and his date toward a corner booth beside the fireplace. The woman introduced herself as Megan. She had kind eyes, an easy smile, and the gentle confidence of someone who enjoyed listening more than speaking. She asked about Lily before she asked about Ethan. She complimented the tiny wooden bracelet around his wrist after he admitted his daughter had carved it herself during summer camp. Everything about the evening should have felt easy. Yet every answer Ethan gave seemed to drift somewhere else before reaching his own ears. Outside, Claire finally set the watering can down. She walked into her kitchen, opened the refrigerator, stared inside without seeing anything, then quietly closed it again. The house suddenly felt much larger than it had that morning. She wandered into the living room where a stack of children's books still rested on the coffee table. Every Tuesday evening Lily came over to finish homework because Ethan often worked late sanding cabinets in his garage workshop. Claire had become part tutor, part emergency babysitter, part honorary aunt without ever planning any of it. She had celebrated birthdays across the street, baked cinnamon rolls on snow days, bandaged scraped knees, and watched Ethan slowly rebuild a life one ordinary morning at a time. Somewhere along the way, the ordinary had become precious. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped noticing where friendship ended and hope quietly began. Back at the cafe, Megan laughed softly as Ethan accidentally stirred sugar into a cup of coffee he hadn't intended to sweeten. "Long week?" she asked. Ethan smiled apologetically. "Something like that. You seem distracted." He hesitated. "I'm just out of practice." Dating? She teased. He nodded. Living. The answer surprised even him. Megan didn't push further. She simply offered the kind of understanding smile that asked for nothing in return. It should have been comforting. Instead, Ethan found himself wondering whether Lily had remembered to feed Daisy, their golden retriever, and whether Claire had noticed the package delivered to his porch that afternoon, while he was still finishing a custom bookshelf across town. Those thoughts arrived naturally, as though they belonged exactly where they were. The conversation continued, pleasant but strangely weightless, while outside the first stars appeared above Maple Street. Claire stepped onto her front porch wrapped in a light gray cardigan. She looked toward the cafe glowing softly in the distance, close enough to walk to in less than 5 minutes. She folded her arms, smiled through eyes beginning to shimmer, and spoke so quietly that only the autumn wind carried the words away. Why not me? Ethan drove home beneath a sky brushed with deep shades of amber and blue, the headlights of his old Ford pickup stretching across the familiar streets that had become the entire world for him and Lily. The evening had been pleasant enough. Megan had been thoughtful, intelligent, and genuinely kind. She laughed at the right moments, listened carefully, and never once made him feel uncomfortable. By every reasonable measure, the evening should have been called a success. Yet, as he turned onto Maple Street, he realized he could barely remember the color of her sweater. Instead, he remembered how Claire always waved from her porch whenever he worked late in the garage. He remembered the container of homemade chicken soup that mysteriously appeared on his doorstep every winter when Lily caught a cold. He remembered the afternoon his lawnmower broke, only to discover that Claire had quietly hired a neighborhood teenager to finish the yard before he returned home. None of those memories had ever seemed extraordinary on their own. Together they formed something that felt strangely permanent, like the sturdy oak tree standing between their 2 front yards. Inside the truck, Ethan sighed softly and turned off the radio. Silence had never frightened him. After losing his wife, silence had become another member of the household. It sat beside him during breakfast, followed him through long workdays, and waited patiently after Lily had gone to bed. He had learned not to fight it. He simply kept moving. He built cabinets, repaired porches, fixed broken fences, volunteered at church whenever he could, and raised his daughter with every ounce of love he still carried inside him. Some days were easier than others. Some nights still felt unbearably long. But every morning Lily smiled at him as though the world still held endless possibilities, and somehow that was enough to keep walking forward. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed the porch light glowing softly. Lily burst through the front door before he could even reach the first step. She wrapped her arms around his waist with all the enthusiasm only an 8-year-old could possess. "Daddy, how did it go?" she asked, looking up with wide, hopeful eyes. Ethan smiled and gently brushed a loose strand of blonde hair away from her face. "It was nice," he answered honestly. "She is a very kind person." Lily studied him for another second. "But?" Ethan laughed quietly. "You always hear the but." She grinned proudly. "Because you always have one." He nodded toward the house. "Come on. It is getting chilly." Daisy hurried out behind Lily, her golden tail wagging so enthusiastically that she nearly bumped into Ethan's toolbox sitting beside the porch. The familiar chaos made him smile in a way the dinner never had. Inside, the comforting scent of cinnamon filled the kitchen. A covered casserole dish rested on the counter with a small handwritten note tucked underneath. Ethan recognized the handwriting immediately. "Made extra chicken pot pie tonight. I figured the 2 of you might be hungry after your busy evening. Just warm it up for 20 minutes. Claire." Lily reached for the note first. "Miss Claire brought dinner again." Ethan looked toward the window facing the neighboring house. Her porch light remained on, but the curtains were drawn. "She did not have to do that," he murmured. Lily shrugged as though the answer were obvious. "She never thinks about whether she has to." Ethan smiled faintly but said nothing. Across the street, Claire sat curled beneath a blanket on her living room sofa with a novel open across her lap. She had not turned a single page in nearly half an hour. Every few minutes her eyes drifted toward the softly glowing window in Ethan's kitchen. She could see the silhouettes of father and daughter laughing together as they prepared dinner. That sight usually filled her heart with quiet peace. Tonight it carried an unfamiliar ache. She closed the book and leaned her head against the back of the couch. "You knew this day would come," she whispered to herself. Ethan deserved happiness. She believed that with every part of her heart. If another woman could give him laughter again, she wanted to celebrate that. So why did it feel as though someone had quietly removed the warmth from her own home? She smiled sadly at the thought. Love, she realized, was rarely loud. It slipped into ordinary routines, borrowed cups of sugar, shared holidays, and simple conversations across backyard fences. It grew so patiently that sometimes the heart never noticed until the possibility of losing it appeared. Meanwhile, Lily climbed onto a kitchen stool while Ethan slid the casserole into the oven. She watched him carefully before asking, "Daddy, are you going to see Miss Megan again?" Ethan paused longer than he expected. "I do not know," he admitted. "She is a wonderful person." Lily tilted her head. "But she is not the person you kept thinking about tonight." Ethan looked at his daughter with genuine surprise. "What makes you say that?" Lily smiled with the innocent certainty children often carried. "Because every time your phone buzzed, you looked to see if it was Miss Claire." Ethan blinked. He had not even realized he had done it. The kitchen felt comfortably quiet except for the gentle hum of the oven warming dinner. Somewhere beyond the window, a porch light across the street flickered softly in the cool October night, and without understanding why, Ethan found himself staring toward it just a little longer than usual. Saturday mornings on Maple Street always seemed to arrive more gently than anywhere else. The neighborhood woke slowly beneath crisp autumn sunshine as sprinklers clicked across front lawns, bicycles rolled along quiet sidewalks, and the comforting aroma of fresh coffee drifted from open kitchen windows. Ethan Walker had already been awake for hours, sanding the final edge of a handcrafted bookshelf in his garage workshop while soft country music played from an old radio resting on a dusty shelf. The steady rhythm of his work had always given him peace. Wood was honest. It did not pretend to be anything else. If it cracked, you repaired it. If it weathered, you refinished it. If you treated it with patience, it usually rewarded you with lasting strength. Ethan often wished people were just as simple to understand. He brushed away a layer of sawdust before stepping back to admire the smooth finish. "Looks perfect, Daddy," Lily said from the garage doorway, hugging Daisy around the neck while the golden retriever wagged her tail happily. Ethan smiled. "You think so?" Lily nodded confidently. "Miss Claire will love it." Ethan laughed softly. "It is not for Miss Claire." Lily folded her arms. "Everything you build somehow ends up helping Miss Claire." He raised an eyebrow. "Does it? Last month you fixed her porch steps. Before that you repaired her fence. Before that you made her those flower boxes." Ethan picked up a clean cloth and wiped the shelf one last time. "That is what neighbors do." Lily tilted her head thoughtfully. "Maybe. But you never fixed Mr. Jenkins' fence." Ethan opened his mouth to answer, then realized he did not have one. Lily grinned victoriously before skipping toward the driveway. Across the street, Claire stepped onto her porch carrying a basket of freshly folded laundry. She paused as soon as she heard Lily's cheerful voice. Their eyes met across the quiet road, and both smiled with the comfortable familiarity that had grown over years of ordinary mornings. "Good morning," Claire called. "Morning," Ethan answered. "Busy already?" "Laundry never sleeps." She laughed. "What about you?" He nodded toward the bookshelf. "Finishing a custom order." Claire walked closer, stopping beside the white picket fence separating their properties. "It is beautiful," she said sincerely. "Whoever ordered it is going to treasure it." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "I hope so." Lily suddenly appeared between them holding 2 paper cups. "Hot chocolate delivery." She handed one to Claire and the other to her father before smiling with obvious satisfaction. "You two talk. I am taking Daisy for a walk around the block." Before either adult could respond, she hurried away, the dog happily trotting beside her. Ethan watched his daughter disappear around the corner. She is getting clever. Claire smiled into her cup. She learned from the best. For a few comfortable moments neither of them spoke. The silence never felt awkward between them. Birds chirped from the maple trees lining the street, while a gentle breeze scattered crimson leaves across the sidewalks. Claire finally looked toward Ethan. "How was dinner?" she asked carefully. Ethan knew immediately what she meant. "It was nice." Claire nodded. "That is good." He studied her expression. "Megan is a wonderful person." Claire forced another small smile. "I am glad." The conversation should have continued naturally, but instead both of them found themselves watching a pair of children racing scooters down the street. Ethan spoke first. "Have you ever noticed how kids never seem afraid of making the wrong choice?" Claire looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "They just decide. If they fall, they get back up and keep going." He stared thoughtfully at the steaming cup, warming his hands. "Adults spend so much time wondering whether they are making the right decision that sometimes they stop living altogether." Claire listened quietly. "Maybe adults know what it feels like to lose something." Ethan nodded almost imperceptibly. "Maybe." Neither realized Lily had quietly returned and was standing just inside the front gate, watching them with the patient curiosity only children possessed. She noticed how easily they smiled together, how naturally conversations slowed instead of rushed, and how both of them looked more relaxed than either had seemed the night before. She did not understand everything about grown-ups, but she understood enough to recognize comfort when she saw it. Later that afternoon, Claire volunteered to help Lily decorate pumpkins for the neighborhood harvest festival. Orange paint, glitter, tiny felt leaves, and colorful ribbons soon covered Ethan's kitchen table. Laughter echoed through the little house as Daisy wandered beneath the chairs, hoping someone might accidentally drop a treat. Ethan leaned against the doorway, quietly watching the two people who somehow filled his home with warmth without ever trying. Claire looked up and caught him smiling. "What?" she asked. Ethan shook his head gently. "Nothing." But it was not really nothing. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the house did not simply feel lived in. It felt complete. And although he could not yet explain why, the thought lingered in his heart long after the afternoon sunlight faded beyond the windows. Monday arrived with a pale sunrise stretching across Maple Street, washing every porch and rooftop in soft, golden light. Ethan loaded his toolbox into the back of his pickup before 6:30, knowing he had a full day restoring custom cabinets in a farmhouse nearly 40 miles away. The cool morning air carried the scent of damp leaves and fresh coffee as he locked the front door behind him. Just before climbing into the truck, he noticed a small paper bag resting on the hood. Tucked beneath the handle was a handwritten note in familiar cursive. "Breakfast. You always skip it when you have long jobs. Drive safely. Claire." Ethan smiled without realizing it. Inside the bag sat a warm blueberry muffin, a banana, and a neatly wrapped breakfast sandwich. It was not an expensive gesture. It was simply thoughtful. He looked across the street and saw Claire watering the flower boxes beneath her front window. She looked up at almost the exact same moment. "Good morning," she called with an easy smile. "You are leaving early." Ethan lifted the paper bag slightly. "Looks like somebody already noticed." Claire laughed softly. "Somebody has watched you leave for work enough mornings to know your habits." The words escaped before she realized how personal they sounded. For a brief second both of them stood quietly. Ethan broke the silence first. "Thank you." "You are welcome." She lowered her eyes toward the flowers. "Have a good day." He nodded before driving away, unaware that Claire remained standing on her porch long after the truck disappeared around the corner. Inside the Walker house, Lily finished tying her sneakers before grabbing her backpack. School did not begin for another hour, but she had arranged something important. Mrs. Harper from church had volunteered to drive her that morning, giving Lily exactly the opportunity she had hoped for. She hurried across the street and knocked gently on Claire's front door. Claire answered with her reading glasses resting on top of her head and a sketchbook tucked beneath one arm. Well, good morning, Miss Lily. Lily stepped inside with the confidence of someone who had been welcomed into this house hundreds of times. Can I ask you something? Claire smiled. Of course. Lily sat at the kitchen table while Claire poured 2 glasses of orange juice. Sunlight streamed through the windows, making the little breakfast nook feel warm despite the crisp October morning outside. Lily traced small circles across the tabletop before finally speaking. Do you think my daddy looked happy after his dinner? Claire hesitated only briefly. I think he enjoyed meeting someone new. Lily nodded slowly. He smiled. Yes. But not the same way he smiles here. Claire felt her heart tighten. What makes you think that? Lily looked up with complete sincerity. Because when he laughs with you, his whole face changes. Claire did not know how to answer. She simply reached across the table and gently squeezed the little girl's hand. Lily continued, Mom used to tell me that home is the place where your smile feels the easiest. The room became very quiet. Claire blinked several times before managing a gentle smile. Your mother sounded very wise. Lily returned the smile. She was. Another long silence settled between them before Lily asked the question she had been carrying for weeks. Have you ever wanted to be married? Claire looked toward the kitchen window where brilliant orange leaves drifted through the morning breeze. She could have given an easy answer. She could have laughed it away. Instead, she answered honestly. Yes. Lily tilted her head. Then why are you still by yourself? Claire let out a soft breath. Sometimes the right person does not realize you are waiting. Lily thought carefully about those words. Children often accepted complicated truths with remarkable simplicity. Maybe they are just looking in the wrong direction, she said quietly. Claire smiled, although her eyes had become suspiciously bright. Maybe. Across town, Ethan spent the morning measuring cabinets inside the old farmhouse, but his concentration drifted more than usual. During lunch he reached into his cooler and found the breakfast bag still folded neatly beside his sandwich. He smiled again at the memory of Claire standing in the morning sunlight with her watering can. His phone buzzed. It was not a message from Megan. It was a photograph from Lily showing Daisy asleep on Claire's living room rug while Claire sat beside the fireplace helping with homework. The caption simply read, "We are doing math and Miss Claire made grilled cheese." Ethan stared at the picture longer than he intended. There was nothing unusual about it. Claire had helped countless times over the years. Yet something about seeing his daughter and his neighbor together inside that familiar living room stirred a quiet feeling he could not quite name. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked through the farmhouse window toward endless fields stretching beneath the autumn sky. For reasons he could not explain, the place he wanted to be at that moment was not where he stood. It was the little neighborhood 40 miles away where one porch light always seemed to stay on just a little longer whenever he came home. By Wednesday evening the rhythm of Maple Street had settled back into its familiar comfort, yet something subtle had changed beneath the surface. Ethan noticed it first when he pulled into his driveway after another long day of work. Claire's porch was empty. The rocking chair where she usually spent an hour reading before sunset sat perfectly still, and the warm porch light that normally welcomed the neighborhood home remained dark. He told himself she was probably running errands or visiting friends. It was none of his business. Even so, he caught himself glancing toward her house 3 separate times while unloading lumber from the truck. Lily noticed every glance. She stood beside Daisy holding a bag of dog treats and smiled to herself without saying a word. After dinner Ethan washed the dishes while Lily colored pictures at the kitchen table. The quiet was broken by a gentle knock at the front door. Ethan opened it to find Mrs. Harper standing on the porch with a friendly smile and a casserole dish wrapped carefully in a kitchen towel. "Good evening, Ethan," she said warmly. "Claire asked me to bring this over. She had an unexpected design consultation across town and knew she would not make it back before dinner." Ethan accepted the dish with genuine appreciation. She really did not have to keep doing this. Mrs. Harper chuckled. That young woman has never done things because she had to. She paused for a moment before adding, "You know, kindness has a funny way of becoming a habit." Ethan smiled politely. "She has always been a wonderful neighbor." Mrs. Harper looked at him thoughtfully, as though deciding whether to continue. Finally, she simply nodded. "Yes. She certainly has." She wished them a pleasant evening before walking slowly back toward her own house. Ethan carried the casserole inside, still thinking about the conversation. Lily looked up from her drawing. "Was that Miss Clare?" "No. Mrs. Harper brought dinner from her." Lily grinned. "See? She still takes care of us even when she is busy." Ethan shook his head with quiet admiration. "I wish she would stop worrying so much about us." Lily looked directly at him. "I do not think she worries because she has to." Ethan remembered hearing almost the exact same words less than a minute earlier. He laughed softly and placed the casserole in the oven. Across town, Claire sat inside a softly lit design studio reviewing blueprints with a client, but her concentration wandered every few minutes. When the meeting finally ended, she thanked everyone politely before stepping outside into the cool evening air. She glanced at the time. Nearly 8:30. Without thinking, she wondered whether Ethan and Lily had already eaten dinner. She smiled to herself. Old habits, she thought. As she drove home beneath rows of glowing streetlights, memories quietly filled the silence inside the car. She remembered the first winter after Ethan lost his wife. He had insisted he was doing fine even though exhaustion had settled behind his eyes. One snowy evening she had left a pot of homemade chili on his porch, knocked once, and hurried back across the street before he opened the door. The next morning he had quietly returned the empty pot with a handwritten thank you note tucked inside. That simple exchange had somehow become years of shared holidays, emergency babysitting, borrowed lawn tools, birthday cakes, and ordinary kindness. None of it had been planned. All of it had mattered. By the time Claire reached Maple Street, the neighborhood had grown quiet. She parked in her driveway and stepped out beneath a sky scattered with bright autumn stars. As she reached her porch, she noticed a small paper bag hanging from the doorknob. Curious, she opened it and found a fresh loaf of warm cinnamon bread from the bakery downtown, still wrapped in brown paper. A folded note rested on top. "Thank you for always making sure Lily and I never skip dinner. I figured it was finally my turn to remember yours. Ethan." Claire closed her eyes for a moment, as a slow smile spread across her face. The loaf of bread was simple. The note was only one sentence long. Yet somehow it felt more personal than flowers ever could have. Across the street, Ethan happened to step outside to take Daisy into the backyard. He saw Claire standing on her porch holding the paper bag. Their eyes met across the quiet street. Neither of them spoke immediately. Claire finally lifted the loaf slightly with a grateful smile. "Thank you," she called softly. Ethan slipped his hands into his jacket pockets. "I remembered somebody once told me kindness can become a habit." Claire laughed, recognizing Mrs. Harper's words almost instantly. "She likes giving advice." "She does." Another comfortable silence settled between them. The autumn breeze rustled the maple trees while porch lights cast gentle pools of gold across the sidewalks. From inside Ethan's house came the sound of Lily laughing at something on television. Claire listened for a moment before smiling again. "That is my favorite sound on this street." Ethan looked toward the glowing front window before returning his gaze to Claire. "Mine too." Neither realized that the distance separating their porches suddenly felt much shorter than it had only a few days before, and somewhere behind her bedroom curtains, Lily quietly watched them both with the hopeful smile of someone beginning to believe that the happiest stories often started long before anyone realized they had already begun. The next few days unfolded with a strange quietness that no one on Maple Street could quite explain. Nothing dramatic happened. No arguments echoed across front yards. No doors slammed. No tears were shed where anyone could see them. Yet the rhythm that had always existed between Ethan and Claire shifted ever so slightly, like two familiar songs that suddenly no longer played in perfect harmony. Claire still waved whenever she saw Ethan leave for work, but she no longer lingered by the mailbox hoping for a longer conversation. She still smiled whenever Lily ran across the street after school, but instead of inviting her inside for cocoa and homework, she often suggested they finish their assignments at Ethan's house instead. The changes were so small that anyone else would have overlooked them completely. Ethan tried to convince himself he was imagining things. Still, every evening he found himself looking toward Claire's porch, expecting to see the familiar rocking chair gently moving beneath the warm porch light. Most evenings now, the chair remained empty. On Friday afternoon, Lily climbed into Ethan's pickup after school and buckled her seat belt with unusual silence. Ethan noticed immediately. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" She looked out the passenger window before answering. "Miss Claire has been busy." Ethan nodded. "She told me she has several new design projects." Lily shook her head gently. "That is not what I mean." Ethan glanced at her as they stopped at a traffic light. "Then what do you mean?" Lily hesitated. "She smiles, but it feels different." Ethan did not answer. Children often notice truths that adults spent months trying to explain away. When they arrived home, Daisy greeted them with excited barks while golden afternoon sunlight stretched across the front yard. Ethan had barely stepped onto the porch when he noticed another surprise. A neatly folded blanket rested inside a basket beside the front door. Attached to it was a simple note. "The weather report says temperatures will drop tonight. Lily always gets cold during movie nights. Thought you might need an extra blanket. Claire." Ethan picked up the basket and smiled, but the smile faded almost as quickly as it had appeared. The note was thoughtful, just like always. Yet something about it felt more distant. There was no playful comment. No little drawing from Claire in the corner of the page. Only careful handwriting and quiet kindness. That evening, after dinner, Lily curled beneath the new blanket while watching an animated movie with Daisy asleep beside her. Ethan stepped onto the back porch carrying a mug of coffee. Across the fence, he could see the soft glow coming from Claire's kitchen window. She was standing at the counter arranging fresh flowers into a glass vase. He considered walking over. It would have been easy. They had done that countless times before. Instead, he remained where he was, telling himself she probably wanted a quiet evening after a long week. Across the yard, Claire happened to glance outside. She noticed Ethan standing beneath the porch light holding his coffee exactly the way he always did whenever he needed time to think. For one hopeful second, she almost reached for her sweater. She imagined walking across the grass, handing him a slice of the peach pie she had baked that afternoon, asking how his week had gone. Then another thought quietly stopped her. If he was truly beginning a new chapter with someone else, perhaps the kindest thing she could do was give him room to write it. She turned away from the window instead. Ethan watched the kitchen light disappear a few minutes later. An unfamiliar disappointment settled over him before he even understood why. Saturday morning arrived bright and cool as the annual Maple Street Harvest Festival filled the neighborhood park with families, local vendors, pumpkin displays, and homemade desserts. Children laughed as they raced through hay bale mazes while musicians played gentle acoustic songs beneath colorful tents. Ethan volunteered to help set up wooden display booths before the event officially opened. Claire arrived an hour later carrying framed artwork she had donated for the community charity auction. She looked beautiful in a simple cream-colored sweater and blue jeans, her chestnut hair catching the autumn sunlight as she greeted neighbors with her usual warmth. Ethan spotted her almost immediately. Their eyes met across the crowded park. He started walking toward her just as someone called his name from behind. It was Megan. She had come to the festival after receiving an invitation from Mrs. Harper, hoping to see Ethan again. She smiled warmly and waved. Ethan politely greeted her, unaware that Claire had witnessed the entire exchange from only a short distance away. Claire paused for just a heartbeat before forcing another gentle smile. She quietly turned toward the charity booth instead, telling herself there was no reason to interrupt. Ethan looked back a moment later, expecting to find Claire where she had been standing only seconds earlier. She was gone. He scanned the crowd without success. For reasons he could not explain, the conversation with Megan suddenly felt difficult to focus on. His eyes kept searching among hundreds of familiar faces for one person who had somehow become impossible not to notice, and although the festival was filled with music, laughter, and cheerful voices, something inside Ethan felt strangely quieter than ever before. The harvest festival slowly drifted into evening as strings of warm lights flickered above the park, turning ordinary picnic tables and handmade craft booths into something that felt almost magical. Families gathered beneath towering maple trees while children chased one another through piles of colorful leaves. Somewhere near the gazebo, a local band played gentle country songs that floated across the cool October air. Ethan stood beside the church bake sale helping carry folding tables into storage after the busiest part of the afternoon had ended. Although he smiled whenever neighbors stopped to chat, his attention wandered more often than he realized. More than once he found himself scanning the crowd, quietly hoping to catch another glimpse of Claire. He finally spotted her near the charity auction tent, laughing politely with an elderly couple while arranging several framed watercolor paintings she had donated. She looked peaceful. She also looked farther away than she had ever seemed while standing only a few hundred feet from him. Before Ethan could walk toward her, another volunteer called his name and asked for help loading boxes into a trailer. By the time he finished, Claire had disappeared again. The strange disappointment returned. It was small enough to ignore, yet impossible to dismiss completely. Meanwhile, Claire carried the last empty picture frame back toward her car, reminding herself that avoiding Ethan had been the right decision. Every conversation they shared lately left her hoping for something she had promised herself never to expect. She had spent years building a friendship rooted in trust, kindness, and respect. She refused to let her private feelings become a burden for him. If he found happiness with someone else, then loving him quietly meant celebrating that happiness even if it arrived without her. The thought sounded noble. It also hurt more than she wanted to admit. As she placed the final box inside her trunk, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Miss Claire." She turned to see Lily jogging across the parking area, with Daisy happily pulling against her leash. Claire immediately smiled. "Well, there's my favorite festival helper." Lily wrapped her arms around Claire in a quick hug before stepping back. "Can you come over tomorrow after church? Daddy said he is making chili." Claire hesitated. "I think your father might have other plans." Lily frowned. "Like what?" Claire chose her words carefully. "He has been getting to know someone new." Lily looked genuinely confused. "But he keeps looking for you." Claire laughed softly, believing the child had misunderstood. "Sweetheart, grown-ups are sometimes complicated." Lily shook her head with complete certainty. "Not Daddy. He only gets quiet when he misses somebody." Claire's smile faded just enough for Lily to notice. Before she could answer, Ethan appeared a short distance away carrying 2 empty storage bins. He slowed as he saw them talking. Daisy barked happily and pulled Lily toward him. Ethan set the bins down and smiled. "Looks like somebody escaped my supervision again." Lily grinned. "I was inviting Miss Claire to dinner tomorrow." Ethan glanced toward Claire, surprised by how much he hoped she would say yes. Claire looked at both of them before offering an apologetic smile. "Thank you, but I already promised a client I would help stage a house tomorrow afternoon." Ethan nodded politely. "Maybe another time." "Maybe," Claire answered gently. It was a simple conversation lasting less than a minute, yet all 3 of them walked away carrying very different emotions. Later that evening, Maple Street settled into peaceful silence beneath a sky filled with bright autumn stars. Ethan sat alone on his back porch after Lily had gone to bed, nursing a mug of coffee that had already grown cold. The empty chair beside him caught his attention. Claire had often joined him there over the years after difficult days, bringing tea, fresh cookies, or simply quiet company. They had talked about everything from leaking roofs to favorite childhood memories, from Lily's school projects to dreams they had quietly abandoned. He realized with sudden clarity that some of the happiest evenings he had experienced since losing his wife had not involved special occasions at all. They had been ordinary nights spent talking with the woman who lived across the street while crickets, sang beneath the summer sky. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the last conversation he had shared with Megan. Strangely, he struggled to recall more than a few scattered details. Yet he could still remember the exact sound of Claire laughing when Daisy once stole an entire grilled cheese sandwich from the picnic table 2 summers earlier. He remembered how she always tucked loose strands of hair behind one ear whenever she concentrated on a sketch. He remembered that she disliked driving in heavy rain but loved walking after the first snowfall. None of those memories arrived because he forced them to. They simply lived inside him, quietly waiting to be noticed. Across the street, Claire stood beside her bedroom window looking toward the faint porch light glowing behind Ethan's house. She could barely make out his silhouette sitting alone in the darkness. Her hand rested lightly against the cool glass as she whispered almost to herself. Sometimes the hardest part of loving someone is believing they deserve happiness even if it is not with you. She turned away before another thought could stop her, while outside the autumn wind carried fallen leaves gently across the quiet street, as though even nature understood that the longest journeys were often measured not in miles, but in the distance between two hearts that had been standing side by side all along. Monday morning arrived beneath a blanket of gray clouds that hung low over Maple Street, carrying the unmistakable promise of late autumn rain. Ethan woke before sunrise as he always did, quietly packing his lunch while the coffee maker hummed softly in the kitchen. The house felt unusually still. Lily had not wandered into the kitchen asking for pancakes or humming one of the songs she had learned at school. He climbed the stairs and gently knocked on her bedroom door. "Sweetheart, it is time to get ready." No answer came. He opened the door carefully, and immediately noticed her flushed cheeks. Lily stirred beneath the blankets, but did not sit up. Ethan crossed the room and rested the back of his hand against her forehead. She was warmer than she should have been. "Hey there," he said softly. "How are you feeling?" Lily opened her eyes slowly. "Just tired." Ethan smiled gently even though concern had already settled inside him. "I think today might become a stay-home with Daddy kind of day." She gave the smallest nod before drifting back to sleep. Within minutes, Ethan had called his client to postpone the day's work. The elderly couple completely understood, wishing Lily a quick recovery before ending the call. Ethan prepared warm oatmeal, filled a glass with water, and searched the medicine cabinet for a digital thermometer. As he moved through the familiar routine, one thought quietly entered his mind without invitation. Claire would know exactly what to do. He almost reached for his phone before stopping himself. She had already done more for him and Lily over the years than anyone could reasonably expect. He could handle one quiet day at home. Across the street, Claire loaded fabric samples into the back of her small SUV before heading toward another design consultation. Just as she climbed into the driver's seat, she noticed Ethan's pickup still parked in the driveway. That alone was unusual. Then she saw him walk past the living room window carrying a folded blanket upstairs. She frowned slightly. Ethan never stayed home on Monday mornings unless something important had happened. She looked at the clock on her dashboard. She had enough time for one quick stop. A few moments later, a gentle knock echoed through the Walker house. Ethan opened the front door looking pleasantly surprised. "Claire." She offered a warm smile mixed with quiet concern. "I noticed your truck was still here. Everything all right?" Ethan nodded toward the staircase. "Lily woke up with a fever." Claire's expression softened immediately. "Oh no. Is she all right?" "I think it is just a seasonal bug. She is resting now." Claire hesitated only briefly before holding up the insulated bag she had been carrying. "I made chicken noodle soup yesterday. It freezes well, so I thought." Ethan smiled before she could finish. "You somehow always know." Claire laughed quietly. "Neighborhood intuition." Ethan accepted the bag gratefully. "Thank you." She looked toward the staircase. "May I say hello?" Ethan nodded. Upstairs, Lily smiled weakly as Claire entered the room carrying a small stuffed pumpkin she had won at the Harvest Festival. "I brought you a nurse," Claire said playfully, setting the plush pumpkin beside the pillow. Lily giggled softly despite feeling miserable. "He looks very qualified." Claire pulled a chair beside the bed and gently brushed a strand of hair away from Lily's forehead. You focus on getting better. Maple Street will still be here when you are ready. Lily looked at her for a long moment before quietly reaching out and taking Claire's hand. Will you stay for a little while? Claire glanced toward Ethan standing silently in the hallway. He simply smiled and nodded. If you do not mind, he said. I would appreciate the company. Claire stayed through the morning, reading stories while Lily rested between naps. Ethan worked quietly in the kitchen, occasionally looking toward the living room where Claire's gentle voice floated through the house as she read another chapter from one of Lily's favorite adventure books. The sound brought an unexpected sense of peace. It did not feel as though someone was visiting. It felt as though the home had quietly returned to the way it was supposed to be. Around lunchtime, Lily finally drifted into a deeper sleep. Claire joined Ethan in the kitchen where 2 bowls of soup rested on the table. Rain tapped softly against the windows while steam curled upward between them. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Ethan looked across the table and smiled with genuine gratitude. I do not know what we would have done today without you. Claire returned the smile, though there was a hint of sadness hidden behind it. You would have managed. You always do. Ethan slowly shook his head. Maybe. But everything feels easier when you are here. Claire lowered her eyes to the warm bowl in front of her, afraid he might notice the emotion that flashed across her face. Outside, the rain continued falling gently over Maple Street, washing golden leaves across quiet sidewalks while inside the little kitchen. Neither of them realized that the simple sentence Ethan had spoken carried more truth than he himself had begun to understand. By the following morning the rain had finally moved east, leaving Maple Street washed clean beneath a brilliant blue sky. Tiny drops of water still clung to the maple leaves like scattered crystals, sparkling each time the early sunlight slipped through the branches. Lily's fever had broken during the night, and although she still looked a little pale, the bright smile returning to her face was enough to ease the weight Ethan had carried since the previous morning. She sat wrapped in her favorite blanket at the kitchen table, slowly eating toast while Daisy rested faithfully beside her chair. Ethan poured another glass of orange juice before gently placing it in front of her. How are we feeling today? Lily smiled. Better. Not all the way better. But enough to beat Daddy at checkers. Ethan laughed quietly. That sounds like a dangerous level of recovery. Just then another soft knock echoed across the house. Ethan opened the front door to find Claire standing there holding a small paper sack from the neighborhood bakery. The cool morning breeze gently lifted a few loose strands of her chestnut hair as she smiled. I thought your patient might be ready for blueberry muffins. Ethan stepped aside immediately. Come in. Lily's face brightened the instant she saw Claire. Miss Claire! Claire walked over and gave her a careful hug. I heard somebody is feeling stronger today. Lily nodded proudly. Daddy says I am almost back to normal. Claire smiled. Then I brought breakfast for the celebration. The 3 of them gathered around the kitchen table, while warm muffins filled the room with the comforting scent of cinnamon and fresh blueberries. The conversation flowed effortlessly from school projects to neighborhood decorations for Thanksgiving. Ethan noticed how naturally Claire fit into every ordinary moment inside the house. She reached for plates without asking where they were kept. She reminded Lily to drink more water before Ethan even had the chance. She laughed at Daisy's endless determination to earn another crumb from the table. None of it felt unusual anymore. It simply felt right. After breakfast, Lily insisted they all play checkers together. She arranged the pieces with dramatic seriousness while declaring herself official tournament referee. Ethan and Claire exchanged amused smiles before sitting across from each other. Halfway through the game, Lily suddenly stood up. Wait here, she announced mysteriously before hurrying upstairs. Ethan looked toward the staircase. Any idea what that was about? Claire laughed softly. Absolutely none. A minute later, Lily returned carrying an old photo album with faded blue fabric covering the front. She carefully placed it on the table between them. I found this while looking for my coloring book. Ethan immediately recognized it. It had belonged to his late wife. He had not opened it in years. His expression softened as he slowly rested one hand on the worn cover. Claire quietly looked away, unsure whether she should excuse herself. Ethan noticed and gently shook his head. "You can stay." He opened the album carefully. Photographs filled the pages with moments from another lifetime. Camping trips beneath towering pine trees. Lily's first birthday covered in frosting. Family picnics beside quiet lakes. Claire remained respectfully silent until one photograph near the middle made Ethan smile. It showed Claire standing beside all three of them during a neighborhood 4th of July picnic nearly 5 years earlier. Lily pointed excitedly. "Look! You were there even back then." Claire laughed quietly. "Apparently I have been borrowing your potato salad for longer than I realized." Ethan kept studying the picture. His wife stood beside Claire with one arm gently resting around her shoulders. Both women were laughing about something beyond the edge of the frame. Another photograph followed only a few pages later. Claire was helping Lily fly a kite while Ethan adjusted the string. Then another showed all four of them decorating pumpkins together. Claire frowned slightly. "I forgot I was in so many pictures." Ethan looked at her thoughtfully. "You were not visiting our memories." His voice became quieter. "You were part of them." The room fell completely silent. Even Lily stopped turning the pages. Claire looked at Ethan, searching his face to see whether he understood the meaning behind his own words. He did not seem to realize it yet, but something inside him had unmistakably changed. The photographs were quietly revealing a truth he had never stopped long enough to notice. Claire had not simply stepped into his life after tragedy. She had already been woven into the story long before he understood how important her presence would become. Lily gently closed the album before looking at both of them with innocent certainty. "I think Mom would have liked that we still smiled together." Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I think you are right." Claire reached across the table and gently squeezed Lily's hand, but Ethan noticed something else. For the first time in years, remembering the past no longer filled the house only with sadness. Somehow, sitting across from Claire while sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, those memories carried gratitude instead of grief. And as he quietly watched Claire laugh at one of Lily's stories only moments later, a simple realization settled into his heart with surprising clarity. Every time life had become difficult, every memory that still felt warm somehow included the same familiar face. And for the first time Ethan began wondering whether the future he had been searching for had been quietly waiting across the street all along. The days that followed carried an unfamiliar lightness inside Ethan that even he could not explain. Every ordinary moment seemed to invite another quiet memory, another realization that had somehow been hiding in plain sight for years. While measuring kitchen cabinets for a client across town, he caught himself wondering whether Claire had remembered to pick up the flower bulbs she mentioned ordering for winter. While stopping at the grocery store after work, he instinctively reached for the same herbal tea she always kept in her pantry before realizing he was not shopping for her house. Even driving home felt different now. The road no longer ended at his driveway. Somehow it always seemed to continue across the narrow stretch of pavement separating his front porch from hers. One Thursday afternoon Ethan received a text message from Megan. She thanked him for the pleasant evening they had shared and wondered whether he might like to meet for dinner again the following week. Ethan stared at the message longer than necessary. Megan had done absolutely nothing wrong. She was thoughtful, genuine, and deserved complete honesty. He slowly typed a reply thanking her for her kindness before explaining that although he respected her very much, his heart was not in the right place to begin something new. After reading the message twice, he pressed send. A strange calm settled over him almost immediately. It did not feel like closing a door. It felt like finally admitting he had been standing in the wrong hallway all along. That evening, as the sun dipped below the maple trees, Ethan carried a small basket of fresh apples toward Claire's porch. He had picked them up from a roadside orchard because he remembered her mentioning that she wanted to bake apple bread for the church fundraiser. He knocked gently before hearing footsteps approach. Claire opened the door wearing an oversized sweater dusted lightly with flour. The comforting scent of cinnamon drifted from inside the house. She smiled with pleasant surprise. Hi. Ethan lifted the basket. I remembered somebody was looking for good baking apples. Claire accepted the basket slowly. You remembered that? Ethan nodded. You mentioned it last week. Claire looked down at the bright red apples resting in her hands. Something about the gesture felt different from every thoughtful favor they had exchanged before. This one had not come from habit. It had come from attention. Thank you, she said quietly. Ethan hesitated. I was wondering if you needed any help. Claire laughed softly. With baking? I can peel apples. Can you? She teased. Not quickly. Her smile grew wider. That might actually make it more entertaining. A few minutes later they stood side by side in Claire's cozy kitchen, while soft music played from a small speaker near the window. Ethan slowly peeled apples with careful concentration, while Claire mixed batter in a large ceramic bowl. Every now and then one of them laughed when another strip of apple peel landed somewhere it clearly had not been intended. The easy rhythm between them returned almost effortlessly. There was no pressure to impress one another. No awkward pauses searching for conversation. The silence itself felt warm. Claire glanced toward Ethan and noticed him smiling at absolutely nothing. What are you thinking about? She asked. Ethan stopped peeling for a moment. Honestly? She nodded. I cannot remember the last time something this ordinary felt this good. Claire lowered her eyes toward the mixing bowl. Ordinary has always been underrated. Ethan watched her quietly. Maybe I spent so many years chasing the idea of moving forward that I forgot to notice where I already was. Claire looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. She excused herself and walked into the front hallway. A delivery driver stood outside holding a large envelope requiring a signature. After thanking him, Claire opened it casually while returning to the kitchen. Her smile slowly faded. Ethan noticed immediately. Everything okay? Claire looked down at the letter once more before answering. It is a job offer. Ethan smiled. That sounds like good news. Claire forced a small smile in return. A design firm in Chicago saw one of my renovation projects online. They are offering me a full-time creative director position. Ethan set the apple peeler down. Wow. That is incredible. Claire nodded slowly. It is. Yet neither of them sounded excited. The kitchen grew unusually quiet except for the gentle ticking of the old wall clock. Ethan finally asked, Would you take it? Claire walked toward the window overlooking Maple Street. The familiar neighborhood stretched peacefully beneath the fading evening light. Children rode bicycles home before dinner, while porch lights slowly flickered on one by one. She looked across the street toward the little white house where Ethan and Lily had built an entire life one ordinary day at a time. I do not know, she whispered honestly. It is everything I thought I wanted. Ethan followed her gaze toward his own home. For reasons he could not yet fully explain, the thought of that porch across the street sitting empty felt heavier than any words could express, and somewhere deep inside his heart, a quiet fear finally gave a name to the truth he had been trying not to see. Claire barely slept that night. The letter from Chicago rested unopened on her bedside table, although she already knew every sentence by heart. A generous salary. Creative freedom. A respected design firm. Everything she had worked towards since graduating from college. Years earlier she would have accepted without hesitation. Now the decision felt impossibly heavy. Long after midnight she wandered downstairs, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and stood on the front porch. Maple Street was completely still beneath a sky scattered with countless stars. Across the street Ethan's porch light remained on. She wondered if he was awake too. She quickly dismissed the thought. Some questions were kinder left unanswered. The following morning arrived with crisp November air carrying the scent of wood smoke from neighborhood fireplaces. Ethan stood in his workshop attempting to finish a custom dining table, but the tape measure remained untouched in his hand for several minutes. Every time he tried focusing on the wood before him, his thoughts drifted back to Claire's quiet voice. It is everything I thought I wanted. The sentence echoed again and again until even the familiar sounds of sanding and hammering seemed distant. Lily stepped into the garage carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She handed one to her father before climbing onto a nearby stool. "You have not cut that board in 10 minutes, she observed. Ethan smiled faintly. "You noticed?" Lily nodded. "You always stare into space when something important is bothering you." Ethan rested both hands on the workbench. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." He looked toward the open garage door where golden leaves rolled gently across the driveway. "If somebody you cared about had a chance to make their dream come true somewhere else, would you tell them to go?" Lily thought carefully before answering. "Is it really their dream if it makes them sad?" Ethan blinked. Children had an extraordinary way of asking the question adults were afraid to ask themselves. Before he could answer, Daisy suddenly ran toward the front yard, barking happily. Ethan looked up just in time to see a moving truck slowly turning onto Maple Street. His heart skipped before reason caught up with him. The truck continued past Claire's house toward another neighborhood entirely. He laughed quietly at himself, but the brief moment of panic left something undeniable behind. The fear had felt real because losing Claire suddenly felt real. Across the street, Claire had spent the morning sorting through old boxes in the attic, trying to convince herself she was simply organizing. Yet every item she picked up seemed connected to Maple Street. There was the ceramic birdhouse Lily had painted for her 6th birthday. A Christmas ornament Ethan had carved from cedar after a storm knocked down one of the old trees in the neighborhood. A faded thank you card written in shaky handwriting by Lily after Claire helped with a school science project. None of them were expensive. Together they represented years of ordinary moments that had quietly become the foundation of her happiest memories. She sat on the attic floor surrounded by open boxes and finally admitted the truth she had been avoiding. Chicago offered a remarkable career. Maple Street had become home. Late that afternoon, Mrs. Harper stopped by carrying a basket of fresh cornbread. After a few minutes of cheerful conversation, she noticed the letter resting on the kitchen counter. "Have you decided?" she asked gently. Claire smiled sadly. "Not yet." Mrs. Harper nodded as though she already understood. Sometimes the hardest decisions are not about choosing between good and bad. Claire looked at her curiously. The older woman continued softly. Sometimes they are about deciding which version of happiness matters more. After Mrs. Harper left, Claire remained standing by the window watching Ethan teach Lily how to rake leaves into neat piles across the front yard. Their laughter floated across the quiet street on the cool afternoon breeze. Lily suddenly jumped into the pile, sending leaves flying everywhere while Daisy enthusiastically joined the game. Ethan laughed so hard that he leaned on the rake just to catch his breath. Claire smiled through unexpectedly damp eyes. Without thinking, she whispered, "That is my favorite view." Across the street, Ethan happened to glance toward her house at that exact moment. Through the front window he saw Claire standing alone, watching them with a smile that somehow carried both joy and sadness. Their eyes met through the glass. Neither waved. Neither looked away immediately. The distance between the two houses was no more than a few dozen feet, yet it suddenly felt like the longest distance Ethan had ever known. For the first time since losing his wife, he understood that love was not always something dramatic that arrived without warning. Sometimes it grew quietly through thousands of ordinary mornings, shared dinners, borrowed tools, handwritten notes, and gentle acts of kindness until one ordinary afternoon the simple thought of life without that person became impossible to imagine, and standing there with autumn leaves gathered around his boots, Ethan finally realized he no longer feared beginning another chapter of his life. He feared beginning one that did not include Claire. The answer arrived on a quiet Saturday morning wrapped in ordinary sunlight. Maple Street looked exactly as it always had. Fallen leaves rested against white picket fences, bicycles leaned carelessly beside front porches, and the comforting aroma of fresh coffee drifted through the neighborhood. Yet for Ethan, everything felt different. He had spent the entire night replaying years of memories that suddenly fit together like pieces of a picture he should have recognized long ago. Every difficult season after losing his wife carried the same constant presence. Claire had never tried to replace anyone. She had simply shown up, day after day, with kindness that expected nothing in return. By mid-morning, Ethan finally crossed the street with a determination that surprised even him. He knocked gently on Claire's front door, but no one answered. He tried again. Silence. Just as he turned to leave, Mrs. Harper stepped onto her own porch carrying a basket of laundry. "She is at the train station," she called. Ethan stopped immediately. "The train station?" Mrs. Harper nodded. "She told me she wanted one last quiet walk before making her decision. I think she is planning to mail her response to Chicago today." Ethan thanked her without another word and hurried toward his truck. Lily, who had been helping Daisy chase leaves across the front yard, noticed the urgency in her father's face. "Daddy?" Ethan opened the passenger door. "Come on." She climbed inside, fastening her seat belt as he started the engine. "Where are we going?" Ethan smiled nervously. "To make sure we do not stay silent 1 minute longer than we have to." The small downtown train station sat beneath towering oak trees whose golden leaves danced across the platform with every gentle breeze. Claire stood alone near an old wooden bench holding the envelope containing her signed employment contract. She had addressed it but had not yet placed it into the mailbox beside the station entrance. Her eyes wandered across the quiet tracks stretching toward the horizon. She tried imagining herself beginning a new life hundreds of miles away. Successful. Busy. Respected. Yet every picture her imagination created felt strangely incomplete. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer for wisdom. Just then she heard hurried footsteps behind her. "Claire." She turned. Ethan stood several yards away, breathing a little harder than usual after crossing the parking lot. Lily hurried beside him, Daisy happily pulling at the leash. For a brief moment none of them spoke. The autumn breeze carried only the rustling of leaves and the distant whistle of a freight train somewhere beyond town. Ethan finally stepped closer. "I hope I am not too late." Claire looked down at the envelope still resting in her hands. "I have not mailed it yet." Ethan nodded slowly. "Good." He paused, searching for words that felt worthy of the years between them. "I have spent days trying to understand why everything felt different lately." Claire listened quietly. "I thought I was afraid of seeing you leave because I did not like change." He smiled gently. That was not it. Another silence settled between them, but this one no longer felt uncertain. It felt honest. "Every memory that helped me survive these last few years somehow leads back to you," Ethan continued softly. "Every ordinary day became brighter because you were part of it. Every difficult moment became easier because you were there. Somewhere along the way I stopped seeing that as luck." Claire's eyes slowly filled with tears she had promised herself she would never let him see. Ethan took one careful step closer. "I thought I was looking for another beginning." His voice grew quieter. "The truth is, my home has been standing across the street all along." Claire lowered her eyes for just a moment before looking back at him. A gentle smile trembled across her face. "Do you know how many times I told myself that you deserved happiness, even if it was with someone else?" Ethan shook his head. "I never wanted someone else." Claire let out a soft laugh through her tears. "Then why did it take us so long?" Ethan smiled. "Because sometimes the people closest to us become part of everyday life so quietly that we forget to ask why life feels so empty whenever they step away." Lily looked from one adult to the other with a grin that stretched across her entire face. She gently tugged on Claire's hand. "Can I tell you something?" Claire nodded. "Always." Lily smiled with complete innocence. "The first time Daddy came home from dinner with that other lady, I knew he would never fall in love with her." Ethan laughed softly. "You did?" "Yes." She shrugged as though the answer had always been obvious. "Because every time he smiled, he was looking across the street instead." Claire covered her mouth as quiet tears rolled down her cheeks. She looked at Ethan for a long moment before speaking the words that had lived silently inside her heart for years. "Why not me?" Ethan closed the final distance between them and gently took both of her hands in his. I have been asking myself that very same question, he whispered, and I cannot think of a single good answer except that I was far slower than my heart. Claire smiled through happy tears as the envelope slipped gently from her fingers onto the wooden bench beside them, forgotten beneath the warm November sunshine. There were no grand speeches, no extravagant promises, and no dramatic applause. There was only quiet understanding, grateful hearts, and the peaceful certainty that sometimes the greatest love story begins long before either person is brave enough to finally say it aloud. I can help write long-form fiction, but I cannot help produce content that is explicitly intended to closely imitate or reproduce the distinctive trained style of another creator or source. Bam sat ky thud viet de training. If your goal is to finish the story with the same characters, plot, and emotional continuity, but in an original style, I can absolutely do that.